You can't have any IT course these days without a heavy dose of virtualization. In this concept and action nugget, let's go ahead and take a look at the virtualization world, and we're going to pick a star player in the world of virtualization. It's ESXi from VMware. So one of VMware's virtualization products is called ESXi. Notice I said one of them is. For example, and in fact, ESXi is indeed what we categorize as a type 1 virtualization product. What does this mean? Well, if we look at something like the free VMware Player application, this is an application that sits upon an operating system. So it is an app inside of an operating system, and then with that app we could virtualize something. Like maybe you want to run Linux in your Windows environment. So you've got Windows as the operating system. You've got the VMware Player, which is a free download, by the way. Check it out if you have never checked it out. So the VMware Player is your app running on Windows, and then we install Linux inside of that virtualization app. That is not, I repeat, that is not what ESXi is. ESXi is a type 1, which means it is essentially the operating system. It does not need this layer. We often say that a type 1 is a bare metal hypervisor. That's the fancy word for ESXi, a type 1, or you could say bare metal hypervisor, meaning we have oftentimes today a rack mount server, for example. So we have this rack server. We install ESXi directly on top of that rack server. Notice no operating system installation. ESXi is plugged into that particular rack server, and then we begin virtualizing on top of the ESXi. We create virtual machines for our Windows, our Linux, whatever we want to do on that particular rack server. Now, there used to be an ESX, so you may run across this still in the literature today, and the ESX had like this console in it. And the VMware people said, you know what, we really need to reduce the operating system to as bare bones as possible. That doesn't sound good, does it? It sounds like we're going to miss something. But no, it's not. They said, let's reduce the complexity of the kernel that makes up the functionality of this particular system. And this kernel, I think kernel is K. You know how to spell kernel, I hope. I don't. How's that? But anyways, the kernel is those particular key elements of the hypervisor that allow it to run against the bare metal. And VMware said, we want to strip down this as much as possible. And one of the reasons why is, of course, security. If you make the kernel and everything else that makes up ESXi as thin as possible, the attack footprint is very small. The things that cyber criminals can do against that machine are dramatically reduced. Now, you might think, well, if this is really stripped down, it's got to be a nightmare from a management perspective. In fact, if it's so bare bones, do I have to deal with like a command line for its management? And the answer is no. We have an ESXi Windows client, and this can be used to manage the ESXi. So if you want a nice, robust graphical user interface, you have one. In fact, you talk about a robust set of interfaces. That's what we have with vSphere. My goodness, I'm running into words that are really tough to spell for me today. Check me on that one. But anyways, the vSphere product is a whole bunch of products. The vSphere is describing many different products that are graphical user interfaces for managing this environment. Think about it. You may have, and this is a relatively small number. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rack mount servers, all running ESXi. Maybe there's 20 virtual machines spread out over these devices, and we want to do all kinds of fancy things like vMotion move virtual machines from one rack mount server to the other. So all this kind of stuff needs to be managed, and vSphere contains all of the products that you might need in order to manage that environment. In our case here, I discussed having, under 10 rack mount servers. Obviously, we see environments today that have hundreds of rack mount servers running ESXi and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of virtual machines. So obviously we need robust software in order to keep all of that running perfectly. And oh yeah, it's vSphere. That's the correct spelling of vSphere. Now, if you'd like to go ahead and get your feet wet, if you'd like to experiment, practice with ESXi, I've got great news for you. It's free. That's right. Here we are up at VMware, and notice there's download software, trial and free products. This is actually showing up because I've visited it before. Let me show you where you would go. There's a downloads, and then there's free product trials and demo, and you could go to all product downloads. And you see there's a bunch of trial products. And of course, one of those is VMware vSphere. So, wow, you can try that entire vSphere collection of tools in order to manage your virtualized infrastructure. We're not interested in going that fancy, though. What we're going to do is we're going to go down under free products, and look at this. It's not titled ESXi here. It's titled the vSphere Hypervisor here, 64-bit. So we go here, and that's where we can download ESXi. Now, you just sign up for a free account at VMware, log in as that free account, accept the licensing agreement for this free download, and then notice we can download ESXi ISO image, including the VMware tools, and you can even download for free the VM Windows client, the vSphere client, so that you could, through a graphical user interface, manage that ESXi that you downloaded. So remember, they call it the vSphere Hypervisor 6.0, and of course, really what that is behind the scenes is the ESXi that we've been discussing in this particular nugget. Now, by the way, we're just messing around right now in a little lab environment. if you were downloading ESXi for the purpose of, in a production environment, virtualizing things, you would want to slow down a little bit here. You would want to go up and you would want to visit this VMware hardware compatibility guide. You want to make sure that the hardware that you plan on running ESXi against is indeed verified and does check out for compatibility. So let's say we're doing the 6.0 ESXi like we are in this demonstration. Let's say you've got a Cisco rack mount server that you plan on maybe even purchasing for this purpose. So I'll say ESXi 6.0, Cisco. We'll say rack mount. I'll say we want to do like legacy fault tolerance on this particular machine. And then we could, go even further with options, or just say, let's view some results. And it starts listing for us particular rack mount servers that we could purchase, and it shows you the supported releases. So 6.0 is available as a supported option for many of these particular rack mount servers from Cisco. So you get the idea. Make sure that your hardware is on that compatibility list so you get the support from VMware. If you want to be a renegade and run it against hardware not on this list, you're probably going to be okay. But just remember, that is going to impact your support options. Now, what if you want to experiment with ESXi, but you don't have a spare machine laying around? Well, here you can see I've fired up VMware's Fusion product. So here's one of those apps that can virtualize for us, and you can fire up ESXi inside that app. Yeah, what a great way to get comfortable with the installation and the management of ESXi. So I'll just go in here and I'll say, look, we want to add a new virtual machine and we want to install from a disk or image. And notice it has recognized it as a VMware product. It calls it the vSphere 2015 beta, which is kind of interesting. We know this is ESXi specifically out of that bundle of software. It's going to create a new hard disk of 40 gig on the hard disk of this host that I'm using, a 4 gig memory allocation by default. It's going to be shared with the Mac I'm doing this installation on using NAT. It's going to give it 2 CPU cores, the CD DVD access, and a USB controller access. Notice we could go in and customize these settings if we wanted to, but these settings have been selected by VMware themselves, knowing what the ESXi would most likely need. So all that's left for us to do is say finish. It says, okay, where do you want to store this particular virtual machine? I will indicate where I want it stored, and look at this, it starts to run. It is going to run us through the installer, so we hit enter, and ESXi is installing on our system. And now, of course, we can practice with this particular interface of ESXi. We can take that Windows client that we downloaded and we can connect to this ESXi in order to practice with the graphical user interface of this particular software. So in this nugget, we discussed virtualization with ESXi, and we demonstrated just how easy it would be for you to get experience with that particular virtualization product with a great price tag of free. You gotta love it. By the way, if you are interested in mastering VMware's ESXi and the vSphere software that you would want in order to manage that, please check out the great training here at CBT Nuggets available from Keith Barker, where he will walk you through becoming a VMware certified professional, if you like, where you will demonstrate your expertise with these particular products. I sure hope this nugget has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.